Oh, hey everyone. Welcome to the presentation for tonight. Obviously, I'm not here in person, so that sucks. I wanted to be, but had something come up, and this is how we're dealing with it. Instead of canceling the presentation, decided to just do a recording and play it for you all. And I know that's not necessarily ideal. We're kind of post-pandemic, yet you're sitting in a room watching a recorded video that feels very pandemic era-y. Sorry, but I will try and make this as enjoyable as possible. So, if this isn't your bag and you just want to watch this later, it will be online. Feel free to go hit the other presentation that's going on. Anyways. With that out of the way, let's talk about what we're going to be discussing tonight, and that is Blazor. Specifically, the title of the presentation is Practical Blazor. And the reason I chose that is because I wanted to showcase just kind of a small handful of things that I discovered while, being interested in Blazor. Kind of ignored it because it didn't seem like it had practical use cases for things I was working on, and slowly I started coming across a few things that it actually worked really well for. So specifically, if maybe you've been on the fence about Blazor, completely understandable. I don't think it's the type of technology yet that's just like caught the .NET industry by storm and everyone's using Blazor. In fact, I think maybe it's kind of the opposite. But we all know, generally speaking, in our field, when a new piece of tech comes out, a lot of times people jump on it and it just kind of blows up, and they don't necessarily have a great reason to be using it. They're using it in maybe situations where it doesn't even really make sense. And I could certainly see that being the case with Blazor. I don't have that great of a pulse on, the .NET ecosystem to know what people are and aren't using. In fact, a lot of the things I've seen, there's been a healthy dose of a bit of skepticism, which I think is good. But you also don't want that to necessarily impede a piece of tech, from really becoming something great, because the community consensus is this is junk. So anyways, instead of focusing on all these like really kind of deep pockets of the platform of Blazor, really wanted to focus on a bit higher level practical uses of it that I think will help illustrate the strengths and weaknesses of Blazor. And where I discovered the strengths was actually through some, personal projects with my company, and then also just side projects. I inadvertently kind of stumbled my way into figuring out some really cool ways to use Blazor that I wouldn't say is a typical of the norm of how people would use it. Anyways, maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But the way that I had ended up using it isn't something that I ever thought of. When hearing about Blazor, hearing it getting released, hearing about it getting released, didn't really think of using it these ways. So anyways, that's what I kind of wanted to focus on during this presentation. So if you're here and you maybe don't know what the hell Blazor is at all, I'm gonna briefly describe things here, probably do it in a poor fashion, but I think you could summarize it as client-side coding with C# and not JavaScript. I think that's maybe the most succinct way to say that. You can achieve a lot of the same things that the big JavaScript frameworks like React, Angular, Vue.js, all these things. You can achieve a lot of that stuff with Blazor without writing any JavaScript. You can write JavaScript and communicate back and forth with C# and JavaScript. But the idea is that if you're not into the JavaScript side of things, you're a C# dev through and through, and don't really like the JS game, Blazor might be something you'd be interested in, because with relative ease, you can now achieve some of that same hotness brought to you by some of the other JavaScript frameworks out there in the world. So anyways, in a nutshell, that's what it is. And it started in 2017 at the NDC Oslo event. Steve Sanderson of Microsoft showed off what would become Blazor. He showed .NET running in the browser via WebAssembly with the .NET Anywhere framework or runtime. I'm not too familiar with that, but that's just a bit of the history. I remember seeing this presentation happening, and it was pretty cool, but it's one of those things. It's like, cool trick, but is this actually applicable? Can we actually use this? A lot of people got interested, and Microsoft started taking it pretty seriously. They eventually added Blazor to their GitHub as an experimental project. And it just kind of kept rolling, gaining contributors and gaining steam. And eventually it became official. So it is out there in the world. It is ready to use. One of the important things to know is that it comes in 2 flavors. I mentioned WebAssembly, and that's one of the flavors that it comes in. So when you're starting, a Blazor project, or something we'll talk about a little bit later is kind of bolting it into an already existing project, which is one of the most practical pieces of the tech that I can think of, that you can just slap it into something that already exists is huge. WebAssembly is one of the ways that you can run this. So I'm not a big WebAssembly expert. I can't talk about the in-depth scenario of how this works. There's a lot of magic behind the scenes. But the biggest thing to know here is if you choose to utilize Blazor in a WebAssembly mode, the browser, the user's browser is going to have to do a pretty hefty download to get that application, because there's a lot of the .NET runtime that comes along with this. So you're effectively getting .NET and C# functionality inside the browser, which is wild. I mean, WebAssembly itself is just a crazy piece of tech. So that's cool, but I don't know that it's very practical for public-facing websites because there is such a big hit to download that big payload. You wouldn't want that on like a commercial public information type website. It would just be kind of silly. But I think where it is practical is for building tools. So if you've got like an internal application for your organization, or you've got a product that you're putting out in the world, where it becomes a bit more feasible for somebody to log into a tool and have it, have a 2-second download or whatever the heck. I think it's pretty practical in that sense. But for the other side of things, when you have something that is a bit more public, where you don't want the user to, suffer those kinds of load times, Blazor Server is the other model. So there's Blazor WebAssembly and Blazor Server. And Blazor Server effectively works like the exact same. I would say a majority of all the code, 90+% of the code you're going to write with Blazor is going to be compatible despite what mode you're running in. I think one of the only things that gets maybe a little bit different is how you mark up your components. That's one of the only things I've come across, and you lose just a little bit of nice development time, type hinting, and auto completion and stuff like that. And I'll show you that here in a bit. But the important thing to know about Blazor Server is you've got this rich client side interactivity that needs to happen. And how the heck are you going to do that with C# in the browser? Like, it's very mind-boggling. Well, what actually happens is when you include a Blazor server in your project, or you start a new Blazor server project, behind the scenes is also a Signal R server getting set up. And so it uses WebSockets to communicate back and forth between the servers. So anytime you've got C# stuff that needs to run, it's actually happening on the server side and communicating right back to the browser. And this, I know this sounds weird and like, why the hell would you even choose to go that approach? Seems like a lot of hoops to jump through. It's actually not. As far as your code authoring goes, that's all hidden to you. You're not actually like needing to wire up those kind of connections. It just works. But given that it is a WebSocket connection, to your server, that does mean that, yes, there is some lag time, but as you're going to see in this, the lag time is quite indistinguishable. But if you have a really popular site that, has regularly heavy traffic, then at that point, you need to start to consider what those trade-offs are, because it's not just operating in the browser. And, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. Maybe I'll come back and overlay them when I'm editing this, because I know the numbers are out there. But it's something in the neighborhood of 2,000 or 3,000 connections at a time running on a very modest size server that the Signal R is going to withstand with no issue. That's quite a bit, especially at one time, right? I mean, there are very few websites, typical websites that receive that kind of traffic, unless you're a very large company with a very popular website, obviously. So, I could think of some companies in town, that probably hit that kind of traffic, but generally speaking, probably not. So anyways, Blazor server, Blazor WebAssembly. For this presentation, almost everything here is going to be Blazor server, because I believe that is the more practical side of things, unless you're building some sort of tool internally, which I think WebAssembly is great for. So anyways, that's the big difference there. Another thing we won't really be covering, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is we're not going to go in depth. I'm not going to cover routing, component architecture, life cycles, stuff like this, which are obviously important, but it's also the boring stuff. And we're all kind of familiar with these concepts, and so I feel like these are the type of things, you could go hit the documents for and pick that stuff up pretty quick. So not going to waste time on that. More going to show, just implementation of some examples. We'll start off by doing a file new, Blazor project out of the box, kind of take a look at some of the important pieces in like the startup file, and then take a look at the existing components that ship out of the box with that. Add a little bit more to it just to see some things like forms. We'll, probably create a form and just see how that works. I feel like that's a very straightforward example to see how to submit a form and see some bindings. And then after that, we'll actually step into one of my projects, my personal projects, which you may be familiar with or heard me talk about it, because I used to use it as examples all the time. And that is my site called QuipVid, which is a site specifically made for uploading movie and TV show quotes and sharing them. So I'm in the process of rebuilding this project. It's sat stagnant for many years now at this point, and working on rebuilding it in .NET. And I believe Blazor will get utilized. I'm in the stage right now of exploring it. I'm kind of liking what I'm seeing from it. And so I want to share kind of my progress of thinking maybe it might work for this, and then how it kind of evolved and where it's sitting currently. And then from there, I'll show one more example. The QuipVid one will actually do some coding. So I will kind of walk you through a whirlwind version of what I went through, and we'll actually code that up in a speed coding kind of fashion. And then that last piece that I'll show you won't really dive into any of the code. Might show some of it, but not going to actively code it. but will show you one of those light bulb moments of why I thought Blazor was pretty cool for it. So anyways, that's what we're doing. I know that was a bit extended. Hopefully the rest of the stuff, since I'll have the upper hand of recording this instead of doing it live, hopefully I can kind of make it just a hair more succinct than it would be in person and get you guys out of here, on time. So anyways, hopefully you're looking forward to this. If not, hit that other session. All right, so we'll just, for the first part here, just go ahead and spin up a out-of-the-box new Blazor project. So I'm using JetBrains Rider here, and I am on Mac OS, but this should be relatively similar with whatever you're using, whether you're using Visual Studio Code on Windows or Mac. These types of project templates should be here, and of course, if you're using Visual Studio proper on Windows, it'll definitely be there. So I'm just going to select ASP.NET Core Web Application, and under Type here, there's a number of them, but there's Blazor Server and Blazor WebAssembly. And I think maybe just for the sake of seeing the WebAssembly version, we'll do that here because this is going to be a short-lived piece. Just going to kind of explore some things and throw a form in there and just kind of see how it works. And this way we can kind of point out some differences between Blazor Server in the next step. So it's going to be a Blazor WebAssembly, Blazor App 1. We'll just leave everything default. It's worth noting that you can still incorporate a lot of the more advanced things like authentication and Docker support. We're just going to leave everything normal here. I am running .NET 6, which I think 7's coming out soon, but 6 is basically the latest and greatest right now. So I'm just going to go ahead and create this. And we'll kind of keep this wide for now. We'll adjust some of this in a little bit. But anyways, under our program .cs file, kind of our entry point for everything here, this is of course using the new minimal APIs. And I will readily admit some of this stuff, like I don't use the WebAssembly version, and so like obviously we can kind of infer what's going on here as far as our root component, being this div with the ID of app, where it'll kind of inject everything there, and then this head outlet head after presumably scripts and stuff being injected after the head. Just gonna go ahead and assume that's what that is. But I mean, you can see this is pretty minimal. We're doing its builder here is a WebAssembly host builder, which is different than what you're going to see in a server app. But I mean, I think we can all kind of get the gist of what is going on here. Kind of bump my text size up there, and then if we kind of just keep traversing this tree, we can kind of get a sense of what is going on here. This app. .razor, clearly kind of the entry point for everything. You can see this router set up here again, not going into these types of details here. Router view is pulling up our main layout, which is probably here under shared. Yep, main layout. And the imports, this is a concept, even in just Razor, traditional server rendered applications in .NET, where you can set up your using statements that are used, all throughout the application. Kind of close those out, keep going up here, and in our main layout, inherits layout component base, which I believe is a baked in, yes, just kind of a baked in class used here. Going to give us some, built-in functionality, but otherwise, aside from this nav menu and this Razor, body call here, this nav menu we can see is clearly some sort of custom component looking thing, and this is Blazor. This is a Blazor component. So we can see that we can jump into that here, and this is located in the shared folder, nav menu right here, which also appears to have a CSS file, which is going to give you that scoped styling just to this component. And like the other files here, this mostly looks like HTML, except when you get into, this on click that's prefaced by this @ symbol. So we know we're stepping away from just native, HTML here and doing something. Well, what does this do? You can see it here. You can see it here. And if we just kind of keep scrolling down, here's nav link. There's another, Blazor component here. We keep scrolling down. Now you can see this toggle nav menu function, and it's simply just toggling this string to utilize this class somewhere, which is right up here. So when this changes, this class is automatically being applied on there. Cool. Menu stuff. Fun. So now if we go and look under our pages directory, and I know this is going to be a little small probably on screen, but if we look at index here, we can see we've got just some simple HTML again with another component. All these things are components. And so if we were to drill into page title, we can see that that's another one of these baked in components to the system. Cool. Survey prompt, however, if we drill into that, that is not. That is in here. So survey prompt is going to probably be under, where are you at? File path. Shared survey prompt. I was there anyways, sorry. Survey prompt, yeah, located under shared. So anyways, let's just give this a run and see what the heck it looks like. So run.NET watch. I'm going to drag this over and just do a little adjusting. Okay, so here we are on that index page. We can see hello world, welcome to your new app, and then how is Blazor working for you, which is clearly this survey prompt here. So I'm just gonna change this with some extra question marks, and we can see that we get live reloading in here. So I'm just gonna remove that. You can see it's pretty quick, pretty nice. This is kind of become a standard, especially in the JavaScript realm. If you don't have hot reload, like, it's not even worth using. So this is nice. Unfortunately, on the server side, it gets a little bit more complicated. It's still there, but just not as quick, because remember, this is the WebAssembly version. So actually, if I just refresh this page, you can see that right away at the top left, that loading there. Granted, I'm running locally, so it's going to be really fast. But if this is out in production, you might see that loading, and you're loading it remotely. You're going to see that probably up there for just a hair longer, but it's still not terrible. And then, of course, I can remove just the plain HTML stuff and that hot reloads as well. So let's just kind of keep going down here. This counter, cool. Click me and the count increases, right? Let's just refresh the page. So we're back to 0 here, and let's go look at that counter page. And notice here is the page directive giving it a URL there. So counter. We got our page title, which is getting injected there in our header. Paragraph, and here's where that current count text shows up. And so now we start to see how the worlds of interactivity from JavaScript and Blazor, C# really start to come together here. So really simple. Counter starts out at 0, and when this button is clicked, it's this increment count function that gets called. So let's just kind of start from scratch here, and so you can see how you get really nice IntelliSense here. So on click, and we're going to call that increment count function there. So, the editors are giving that nice, auto completion that we're really used to in the the .NET world. So that's pretty nice. And then you can affect this even at runtime. So like I'm up to 15 here, and let's change current count increment to, you know, like add 100 to it. So now you can see how that changes on the fly. We can set count here back to 0. Cool. Oops. Good Lord. Plus, there we go. Yeah, so there you saw some nice errors, right? So save and hey, we get our error there. Pretty crazy how fast it is. It just kind of blows my mind a bit. And then let's try something here. Let's try like a console write line. Oh man, typing is not my strong suit tonight. So interesting, right? Watch this. Still firing. I don't have any console write lines down here. But remember, this is all running in the browser, right? Whoa. So over in console is where that's firing. It's just kind of neat. Let's do something like, so you can get your variables in there. Yeah, cool, right? So that's just a quick tour. Oh, here's our little nav down here, so we can probably see. Oh, where the heck is that current class even getting applied? Who knows? Come on. Oh boy, it's around here somewhere. Sidebar, what was there? Oh, there it is down here. This guy. Collapse. So anyways, yeah, that's cool. So what else do we have in here? Fetch data, kind of an interesting one. This, just gonna scroll down here to the code block here. And so we've got a class of weather forecast that's defined just right in here. Cool. Public weather forecast, just date, temperature summary, Celsius and Fahrenheit. And then on initialize, which is one of the life cycle events that we're going to get out of the box, you can see that HTTP get JSON from sample data / weather. So if we look in our www root, we have that sample data and weather JSON file. So we're just fetching that and even doing just a little bit of little conversion on that, which is cool. And of course we got our C# niceness. So we get that JSON and we're typing it right to that class. Pretty neat. And then we're looping over it here. So each time we hit this, it's gonna pull that down. Pretty neat. You get the idea. So let's real quick, maybe just, I know this is going longer than I wanted. Good Lord. So let's just create something here real quick. Let's create a new page and where you at? Blazor component. And let's call it contact, and we'll make it a page. I think really the only difference here is perhaps it doesn't put that page directive up there when you create a component. Otherwise, it's the same stuff, so whatever. We got a new page with a H3 on it, and now if we hit contact, we should get that page. Awesome. Just make sure we've got live reloading happening there. Great. So let's maybe just start out with, I don't know, throwing a form in. It's going to be a really basic form. This is using Twitter Bootstrap just right out of the box. So I don't remember my Twitter Bootstrap stuff because I don't use it ever. Oh, this guest user is even using Bing. So, good Lord have mercy. Bringing back some really relevant results. Thanks for reminding me why no one uses Bing. Twitter Bootstrap form. Hey, there we go. Bing. Okay, so div class. Okay, so form group. Nice. Okay, and then input type text. Yeah, that works. Class form control ID name. Yeah, good enough, right? Just get a couple fields here. This one's going to be email. Yeah, let's just see what we got here so far. Looks like junk, but whatever. This isn't a styling class. Let's get some placeholders maybe. Email. Email. Okay, cool. And perhaps a submit button. Woo! Buttons in Twitter Bootstrap, BTN, yeah. Danger, yeah, sure. Works for me. And again, with the sloppy, just, I can't stand that spacing. Okay, cool. We have a form. Awesome, right? What do we want to make this more, C-sharpy, Blazory. So how do we do that? Well, first we can change this just name email into like an actual class, right? So let's make one and just call it contact model, whatever. String, oops. Yep. Email. Yeah. Let's follow some nice conventions here, whatever. Okay. Name, email, that will work. And we can maybe even look at doing some decorator stuff just a little bit later. Notice down here, every once in a while when you're running live reload, it'll tell you, hey, do you want to restart this? Because it did something a bit more hefty than it needed to restart the app, and you can change that to always, and that will work. And then what we want to do after that is actually set up a variable for our property for this to use. So we'll just call this, this is our contact model, and we'll just call it, yeah, that'll work. Contact model. Oops, we'll say, we'll just new this up. Works for me. And really what we want to do is when this is submitted, do something with it. So let's stub up a method here. Just call it handle submission. And normally, obviously, you would, post this off to somewhere or do something with it. But we're just going to, for right now, say it worked. Okay, so we've kind of got this stubbed up, but we need to do something with our form. We need to make this a bit more Blazor aware, and forms are something that is baked in to the framework. And so there is this edit form component to use, and we give this a couple of things. One of the things is a model that we're using. So that is our contact model that we set up. And then also your submit function. Now notice there were a couple of them: on submit, invalid submit, and valid submit. We're just gonna do submit for now, just to keep the show going here. And this is going to be our handle submission down here. So first of all, before we run this, before we run this, we also need to change these inputs. So these inputs are going to be another control called input text. As you can see, there's different things for different types of inputs. Do the same thing here. And we also need to bind these, which might be what this is barking about down here. So we are going to bind value to contact model.name. Grab this whole chunk and repeat it down here. .email. I think we should be good at this point. So we know we are going to do a console write line down here, and as shown earlier, that does show up in the browser. Close. Bring. Hello. Good Lord. Where's my little... Whatever, that'll work. Yep, name, Myke, mail.com, submit. It worked. Cool, so let's just kind of prove that that's working by showing some of our values here. So contact model.email. And submit, and there's my email showing up in there. So really quick run through of what it's like to work with Blazor components, specifically WebAssembly. And you know, obviously we had a bit of magic stuff going on here with these edit forms. What I'm going to show you next in the QuitVid example is not using the WebAssembly approach. And like I said, a lot of it's going to be the same, except there's just not the same concept of, you know, this full kind of spa experience going on here. So let's hop into the next example. Okay, and on to our next section here. So I've went ahead and preloaded up the project and got it launched and running, and we'll just kind of take a quick preview of what's in place right now. So on the home page here is simply just a list of quips, little movie quotes and TV show quotes. And when starting to rebuild this, one of the things that I wanted to work really well was on a mobile device, if you're viewing it, especially if you're navigating it, don't want to have to press play on the video. Very similar to YouTube. So if you're on YouTube via the web browser, if you just go to youtube.com, type it in, hit play on a video, it'll just start playing automatically. If you tap on a video, it'll bring up the player and it'll just start playing it automatically. And it's a bit too much to get into, but just trust me, that if you build your site in a spa-esque way, so if you're not actually doing a new page load, and the user has interacted with the page, so for example, tapping on a thumbnail of a video to play it, it will play without issue. But modern browsers have a check in place so that the browser can't just automatically play videos with sound. So if you haven't interacted with the page yet, it won't auto play with sound. You can auto play a video, but it's muted by default. So if you go to YouTube and just tap on a video, it will work as expected. But what I was doing when restructuring this was I was just trying to build it as more of a traditional server rendered site, because there's nothing too crazy going on here. But then I ran into the issue that every time you tapped on a new video, you would have to hit play again manually. And really the only way to avoid this is to not do a full page reload. You need to inject, that content somehow. So obviously there's 100 different ways to go about this. I want it to be really smooth, so I didn't want to just do a dumb hack job in there. Just really wanted it to feel right. And so I figured, well, what a good time to kind of look at Blazor to see what's going on. I had already kind of had a win with it, testing some other stuff, and wanted to try it out here. So anyways, what I've done is I've kind of stripped back some of the progress that I've made on this to kind of replay it with you now. If we take a look at this page, it's just really standard .NET, web stuff. It's got a, it's a Razor page, a CSHTML. So I'm setting the layout just like you would. Basically getting all of our quips here. I am using the Umbraco content management system here. So when you see stuff like model descendants, this is an Umbraco thing. Anyways, keep rolling down. I've got this animation stuff right here. And then right here, we're looping through the quips. And right now I've got it kind of queued up, even though I could link right to their URL. Of each quip. I've actually got it set up right now just to alert the ID of that. And so if we look real quick here, so using good old trusty jQuery here. So on the quip grid, when an anchor of one of those list items is clicked, get its data attribute for the ID and just alert it. And then here's where we're gonna come back and do some Blazor stuff. So that's kind of queued up right now. So first things first, this is one of the cool things. One of the really cool things I think about Blazor is this was an Umbraco CMS, like I said. When I got the idea to try and use Blazor for this, I thought, what a pain that's going to be. It's another project structure. I don't know how challenging it's going to be to kind of intermingle these two worlds, and I'm pleased to say that it's pretty easy. So here's a pretty typical startup file. There are some things that are kind of specific to Umbraco in here, but there's really just two things we need to add in. The first one being under our configure services here. Well, I have services, add server-side Blazor. Good there. And then down in our other configure method here, we need to use endpoints. Trying to remember what this looks like exactly. So use endpoints and then just endpoints dot map Blazor hub. Cool. And this is what gets us, our Blazor hub routing pieces, all of its niceness. So this signal R is going to get set up behind the scenes, and magically anything that we put in here on the Blazor server side will do that communication back and forth through signal R. So that's really all there was to set that up. It would probably be an okay thing at this point to just go ahead and restart just in case here. So I'm just gonna restart the server. This is a big enough change that I wouldn't necessarily rely on hot reload getting it right. So just gonna refresh over here. Okay, so nothing has changed here other than the fact that behind the scenes, like, we're all ready to rock and roll with server-side Blazor. So let's just start. I always like to start something like this with just a super quick sanity check. So we've already got our components folder here under shared. And what I'm gonna do is just create a new Blazor component, and we'll just call it. And you can see over here, the development setup can get a little wonky, like I said, with the server side stuff at times. So sometimes you kind of find yourself sitting here, just refresh the page, should be fine. But I think that typically only happens when you're like adding a new component or you do something that's a bit more destructive. That can happen. So anyways, let's maybe just start here with getting this to render on the page. So if we come back to home here, let's just go right here, just make sure we're good. Refresh. Okay, Cool. So we've got hello there. So I'm just going to stick this at the top so we can see it easily without having to scroll through stuff. So this is going to be a little bit different. We're not going to be able to just call psh like that to get that component in there because it's server side. It does just work a little bit different. So you're going to use the component tag here, and then we'll call it type of psh at that point. And if we save this, I believe, that's fun. Oh, yep, sorry. So on this tag, we do have to tell it its render mode. And we're gonna call the render mode server pre-rendered. And so notice there was server and server pre-rendered, and I think you could take a pretty good guess at what that means. So here we have psh, and if we view the actual page source, we can see that that psh tag is actually in the source that came back from the server. Whereas if it were just server rendered and we refresh, we no longer have, well, there are some psh, but they're not what we're looking for. So that is nice. I mean, right out of the box, you know, SEO stuff is taken into consideration, and you can actually kind of see it when I refresh here. The psh tag is there just right away. But if I change it back to server and refresh, you can see there's that just little bit of delay in there, that flash of non-rendered content there, which, you know, we come to expect with a lot of the JavaScript type frameworks. So cool that we get this just right there within that tag instead of having to set up like a whole other, you know, service layer to kind of handle that pre-rendering. So anyways, so we are working. Let's just decorate this up just a hair more so we can see just a little bit more advanced example. So let's do something like a for each. Let's first come down here and actually just set up a list of type. Do we have, we'll just do strings. We'll just do a list of strings and we'll call them quips. So this is just a really simple example here. So up here, we'll do a, and quip. Cool. So we've just got this list. It probably shouldn't be rendering. In fact, it might be, yeah. So let's set our, it's saying, hey, you've got no quips to actually loop through here. So let's actually call this a parameter. And then now that we've treated this as a parameter, back over here, we can pass in that value to that parameter. So the way you do this on the server side, this is one of the little bit differences. If you're using the full-on WebAssembly stuff, you get some really nice kind of like quips here would just start to come up for you. But because we have to use this generic component tag, we have to qualify it just a little bit more. So it's not params, I think it's just param quips equals. And I've already got quips up here, right? So maybe let's just go like this. We'll do something like quips. And then out of this, we'll just select the quip title. And to list, because that parameter is expecting a list of strings. And so here we've got our quip title string to list, passing that in. Still angry. No writer was cached. Okay. What are you talking about? Parameter list quips for each. Do a nice refresh again. When in doubt, restart. See what happens. Refresh. Hey, there we go. I don't know what that was. Just some of those hot reload things. Again, sometimes they get a little finicky. Gotta love it. So, okay, back here. Scroll back down. So yeah, here we got our quip title coming in there, and of course we could do, you know, something a little bit more advanced, like quip title. Oops. Name, quip name, save. And then, yeah. So anyways, you get the idea. So yes, we've proven that Blazor components are working here. So let's try and fly through kind of the rest of this. So let's cut this and just paste it down here. We'll keep it there for now so it gets kicked down, and we're gonna kind of do something a bit radically different now. So under components, we're gonna add a new Blazor component, and we'll call this quip player. And the idea with this now is that when we click on one of these items, we actually want that to bring in a new piece of UI, and we need to pass data to it. So we pass in this ID, and with that ID, we'll be able to get its video, all the rest of the metadata about it, who uploaded it, how many views, all that kind of good stuff. Related videos as well. So let's just kind of just go ahead and jump into this. So for our quip player, what I'm going to do is actually end up just copying a bunch of stuff, because you've seen me fumble around enough trying to do things. So copy. Quip player, paste. See if anything's barking at me or not. Doesn't seem to be. Okay, save. Refresh. We shouldn't see anything different yet at this point, except at the very bottom, we'll have that old stuff in there. Okay, so let's just kind of take a look at what we pasted in here crudely. So of course we got our imports. This quip player is hidden by default, and you'll see some of that here in a second. So if there is a quip available, then just start showing basically the player for this. We've got a close button on there. Here we bring in the quip's name, its title, video path, everything associated with it. And then we've also got related quips that we show underneath of that. And so we loop over those, display them. And then down in our code section down here, there's just a little bit of magic-y stuff here. So here we've got the .NET reference, object reference of type quip player, and we've called it object ref. We'll come back to that in just a second. We saw the parameter stuff with that component a little bit ago. Very similarly, we're just going to be passing in an ID to that. And then we've got a few more other properties here set up. So we can store the quip, set a CSS class name, which we kind of saw a little bit of that in that first example. This is an Umbraco specific thing where we can set the helper to query the data, and then related quips. So keep scrolling down here. On initialize, we have this lifecycle event where we basically inject the helper there and then call the base on initialize method. And we've got this on after render async. And this is where a little bit of magic happens. So this is a bundle and send .NET helper. And that's a method that I have down here, which basically passes a reference for our .NET environment so that JavaScript can actually call a C# method. Let that sink in a little bit, because we're doing both things here. We've got JavaScript calling C# and C# calling JavaScript. Very interesting. But in order for JavaScript to call into our C# stuff, you've got to have this reference basically to the environment. And there's other ways to do this. I got this from Microsoft's documentation. You don't necessarily have to do it this way. But what this is doing here, we have access basically to a JavaScript runtime. And I'm telling it to invoke the set.NET helper function. So if we go to site.js here, here's where that set.NET helper is. It receives the reference to that and then just sets it in the window. So we have access to that. And then you'll see this get used elsewhere. And then just a little mode up here just to, once this takes over, now I know that SPA mode is being used, so you can kind of juggle back and forth. It gives you a lot of flexibility to do all sorts. So that's the idea there. And then you may have seen over here, when we click on one of these items, we will call that C# function here in just a moment. So let's first start off with coming down to the bottom of our code section here. And the first thing we want to do is to set up a function down here. So we will call this load quip. And for now, let's just make sure things are working, and we'll do a console write line. Yay. And down here, we are going to say it is JS invocable. So that means we should be able to call this from our front end. So now we'll hop back to the site.js over here, and we will call window.NET helper invoke method async, the name of our method, load quip, and we'll pass in that ID that we got. So let's just window.NET helper invoke method async. Hopefully this is all right. And that is our C# function there. Hopefully we'll see this. I think console write line should work right here, but and let's make sure this got refreshed by taking out that alert so we don't see that in there. Okay, cool. Now I'm not really getting anything. Let's just make sure. Gonna restart everything here before I... This is all sorts of fun. Sorry, I'm a freaking idiot. And before we can expect any of this to work, we need to actually load in that component. So quip player, we don't need to worry about passing any parameters there. So we will remove that. We'll server pre-render it. Fine. And we can remove a couple of things I was testing around with here. Set.NET helper, yay, that worked. Okay, now, here we go. So now we can see that JavaScript is effectively calling this load quip method over here. So now we can work on actually plumbing in some functionality here. Let's go ahead and uncomment this, so when we add this class, it starts to darken it and remove the scroll ability inside of there. And what we want to do here is set our quip equal to helper. Did I label that right? helper, okay. Helper.content, and this will be set to our ID that came in, which doesn't, oh yeah, there we go. Load quip ID, yep. And we'll type this as an old quip. Don't worry about that. That's just me juggling some of my old stuff and my new stuff. Related quips is going to, again, this is Bracco-ish stuff. I should probably enlarge my text, sorry. First descendants of type old quip. Where this is gonna get a little, just ignore this. I'll probably fast forward past some of this. Okay, so there's my related quips, and from here we'll call the show player method, which I think just sets a string. And then this is a Blazor specific thing. We're going to say state has changed, which kind of triggers a, a refresh up and down the signal, whatever you want to call it. And then we are going to invoke async a JavaScript method. And that is called replace URL quip.url invoke void async. There we go. Yeah, I think that's it. Let's save this. And give some praise to the demo gods. See if they're with us. Yeah. There we go. So I think there's one piece that's kind of left on here that's broken. If we try and play one of these, I think it's just going to try and go to the URL, which, nope. So what should happen when you click this is that they should actually play. So really quick up over here. So this is the component. This is where that related quips are getting loaded, and I can prove that by commenting that out, refreshing over here. No related quips there. So if we refresh, get those back, what we're gonna do is do an on click, and here again we're kind of blending worlds. So we're saying on click, run this C# function here of load quip, and quip is our local var looping through this. Then we're going to pass in the quip ID. So now we called both this load quip function from both C# and JavaScript. And so if I bring one of these up, there. And notice the URL isn't changing, so I think maybe I commented a piece of that out for demonstration purposes. I think so. Replace URL. If we come back to site.js, yeah, I removed it entirely. So throw a funky funk up here. Replace URL. We're gonna get that URL coming through, and going to be a history.replace state null nothing URL. Cool. And then we'll just do a little focus on that video. Okay. So yep. So now it's changing that URL anytime we click on it. And then when that's cleared, also got that URL clearing out of there. So now you can starting to feel, like a true spa at this point. So hopefully that illustrates in a very long-winded fashion how you can blend the worlds of more traditional stuff and kind of tie in new stuff to bring in that client-side functionality without it all having to, live into a full system like a React or an Angular. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and I'm going to wrap this up by showing just a couple of code snippets from another project I was working on and why I believe it's another practical piece for assessing whether or not Blazor is for you. Okay, so unfortunately my memory failed me just a hair on showing off this last bit, so my apologies about that. I'll explain what I thought I remembered doing, and I remember changing it for other reasons, not related to Blazor or it being a bad approach. So what I was working on was a mobile app proof of concept, and you can see it here. It's a little bit wide, but just imagine, down to something more like that. So I was working on this proof of concept, and even though it wasn't going to be seen by a lot of people, wanted it to be pretty secure, because what I was trying to do was get live logs coming in of events that were happening. And to do that really quickly, I can just, via JavaScript, basically subscribe to a WebSocket to receive those events. And that would have required putting a key in there that could be retrieved by, somebody smart that knows what they're looking for. And so when I knew that I'd be putting this out on the web, that I was like, don't really want to do that. And so that's when I had thought of Blazor as basically a drop-in replacement of doing the exact same thing, but the sensitive pieces would be on the server. You wouldn't be able to see that information, the key in there. And so that's actually what I started doing, and it worked great. But then I decided I needed to do some other stuff, so I abandoned that approach, but I still thought it worth just spinning through here really quick. So instead of listening to that WebSocket, I've got another event happening on like Azure, functions. When an event comes in, it basically hits this service. And so I've got just a little API endpoint over here looking for information. So the payload gets sent down, and then basically just doing some really quick checking here, and then calling this sensor log service. Basically just a function I set up to publish events. So that log service looks something like this, basically a pretty boilerplatey event emitter. So when that gets called, it calls these functions, and then over on the component, so activity list.razor, here we can see just this one piece right here, the on sensor log received, and then I'm just appending that log to this list we have going on. So sensor logs up here, I'm just appending that that way, and then it just, here's a example of that list. This one's just default right now, and nothing will come through here. I think over here I'm actually sniffing out, allowed locations. So I was only allowing this from a certain set of locations. And then when those events happen, boom, they show up in here. But anyways, the point being that even though I was doing standard stuff, I mean, this is all just basic web application. And the moment I needed to do something that required a bit more of a server end, I didn't really have to do anything other than just compartmentalize, that HTML into a component. I didn't have to worry about like, oh shoot, should have done this as, a React app or a, Angular CLI app that I would have had to spin up, and just so much that goes into having to do a full spa, when with these tricks, you can just slap it in really, really, really easily. So anyways, I wish I'd had more of that secure piece to show off. I thought that was an interesting application for using something like Blazor. So anyways, hopefully you all enjoyed this. I appreciate you putting up with the recording here, and I'm gonna try and be online to answer questions. The likelihood of that is pretty small. Probably be traveling back late that night, but if for whatever reason I have the opportunity to, I'll try and be online, and I'll let the fine folks running the event tonight know. So anyways, thank you. Take care.